The government is today announcing plans to allow people who come into contact with someone with COVID-19 to avoid isolation by taking daily tests. So let's find out a bit more about that. The Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab joins us now from Westminster. Just tell us a bit more about these plans to allow people to take daily tests rather than isolate. What's the idea?
Good morning, Sophie. Well, look, we've made great progress with the rollout of the vaccine. Over 34 million people have had their first dose, 60% of the population. And one of the things we're looking towards are the next steps of the roadmap. So obviously the 17th of May is a stepping stone, and then the 21st of June. And as part of the process of easing out of lockdown, we want to make sure, and we're looking at it, we're trialling it, and we're obviously testing it very carefully, but whether the current system of isolation at home can be if you like, scale back. And the way to do that, or one of the ways to do it, and again, I just emphasise we're testing it, is to have these rapid tests so that you take one a day, and as long as you haven't got symptoms, that would allow you to avoid having to do the isolation you'd otherwise need to. It's just one of the tools, along with the vaccine, that we're looking at very closely to make sure that we take steps out of this lockdown back to normal in a sure-footed way.
Is there a risk about the reliability of these rapid tests, though, the lateral flow tests? Apparently, they only identify around 58% of people who have COVID without symptoms. Is that really good enough?
Well, that's all the more reason that we're testing it, looking at it very carefully, but you'd have to take them daily. You would have to be without symptoms, and it's on top of all the other measures. So it's something that we're looking at, but of course, as you can see, it's always a balance. We're not going to do anything that would imperil the huge progress we've made in rolling out this vaccine, keeping people safe, getting the economy back to normal.
You talk about the huge progress in rolling out the vaccine. The Sunday Times is reporting that secondary school pupils could be offered the Pfizer vaccine as soon as September. Is that something under consideration?
Well, I'm not going to speculate at what we're going to do beyond the existing roadmap. The key thing we're focused on right now, and I know there's a lot of speculation, Sophie, in the papers, but the key thing we're focused on right now is making sure that every adult has the vaccine or is offered the vaccine by the end of July.
Is it under consideration, though?
It will be a massive accomplishment, but it's also the point at which, and you'll have seen it from the roadmap, that almost all of the social restrictions will be lifted. And I can't talk to the details of the other trials because that's not within my portfolio. But you're right that we're looking at all the different contingencies to make sure that the easing up of the restrictions, the returning to normal, can be done in a safe and secure way.
OK, you're talking about, of course, the success of the vaccine rollout and the sort of next steps going forward. Almost 70% of adults in England now have COVID antibodies, either through prior infection or because they've been vaccinated. But we're still not even allowed to give our mums a hug if both of us have been fully vaccinated. Why not?
Look, there's all of the risks that come with this that we've just got to gauge very carefully. On the 17th of May, we'll take the third step in the roadmap, if you like. We'll ease up. There'll be more opportunities for households to mix inside, subject to the caveats on that. And then come the 21st of June, which is, you know, we're already into May, we'll have almost all the social restrictions that will be lifted. So all I'd say to people at this stage is I know that people are hankering just to go a bit faster, but actually I think, feel vindicated that taking steady steps out of the lockdown is the smart way to go. And then we can assess all the data, all the evidence that comes back and make sure that we're not unpicking the gains that have been made. So we're very close now to really turning the corner. And I think we still need to be careful as we go, because as I said, we don't want to see the gains lost and the sacrifices that have been made undone.
I mean, you talk about balancing risk. Surely it's got to be quite low risk to hug someone who's been vaccinated at a time when infections are so low. And of course, every death is a tragedy. But there were 7 deaths from COVID yesterday. An estimated 450 people die of cancer every day. They're still not allowed to hug their loved ones. Are we at a risk of prioritising COVID above all else right now?
Well, we've heard this debate over the last year, and we've always said it every...
Yeah, but it's more... But just to come... It's not really a debate to have over the last year, is it? I accept that at a time when infection rates were very high, when deaths were high, that was not the debate to be having. But right now, when there were 7 COVID deaths recorded yesterday, when 70% of adults in England have antibodies. Surely this is the time to be having the debate.
And we are, and we've had it for the last year. And the question will be, I mean, the question you asked takes us straight into vaccine certificates and all the rest of that, which has been very contentious for various reasons. All I'd say is actually, if you take a look at the big picture, by the time we get to the 21st of June, almost all social restrictions will be lifted. So there's only a little bit more time to go, but it's right to make sure we do it in a careful way. And I think the public support that. They've supported the approach by and large, but I think to their great credit. And we're at the end, really, of the process, if you like. We've got 2 more steps to take. But I do think, given the rollout of the vaccine, that's exciting. It's got people thinking about not just the social interaction, but, yeah, of course, things like hugging your loved ones that you haven't been able to do for a while. But I do think we just need to make sure that in the last lap, if you like, that we're careful and we don't lose the gains that we've made.
You talk about almost all restrictions being lifted in the months ahead. What exactly do you mean by that? What restrictions are going to be here to stay?
Well, if you look at the roadmap, it's set out very clearly. We get to May the 17th. There's going to be, subject to the evidence, and the way we set out is no earlier than the 17th of May. We'll look again at the travel restrictions, so that's something that's going to be set out well before then. There'll be the opportunity for two households to mix indoors. Then when we get to June, there's a whole range of other lifting of restrictions, and the roadmap sets out that most, if not all, of the social restrictions will at that point, again, subject to the evidence, be lifted. So the point I'm making is, and of course, we'll set out what other conditions and caveats and safeguards still need to be in place based on the evidence as we go. But the point I'm making is actually that 21st of June, 4th step out of lockdown is not far away now. So I think if we just hang on, keep being guided by the science and the evidence, measure the progress we're making carefully, we're nearly there.
We've seen some pretty harrowing scenes from India, a country which really is still grappling with their COVID-19 pandemic. Is the UK doing enough to help?
Yes, and I recently spoke to Foreign Minister Jaishankar, my opposite number there. We've said that we'll do whatever we can, whatever they ask for. I do think it's important with these emergency packages that you listen very carefully to the Indian authorities and see that we're giving them what they need and want. So we've given them oxygen concentrators, we've given them ventilators. We're going to be sending out another package of 1,000 ventilators very shortly. We've also looked at these oxygen generators like mini factories. That's the thing they need right now. And I've been in regular contact with Foreign Minister Jaishankar. I'll be seeing him tomorrow as well. And we're doing everything that our Indian friends need in their hour of need.
I just want to move on to talk about the funding of Boris Johnson's flat renovation, a story that, of course, has been bubbling for a little while now. The Sunday Times has been told that there was a second invoice for the work that was paid directly, settled directly with a supplier by a third party believed to be a donor. Is that true?
Well, Sophie, as the Prime Minister set out this week, he covered the cost himself. He's followed all the relevant codes of conduct at all relevant times. He took official advice all along the way. There are 3 reviews now, I think, into this, and I think the right thing for me to do is not add political commentary that could otherwise prejudice those reviews, but to respect the integrity of them. So I'm not going to offer you, I'm afraid, any more commentary or if you like, chatter on the various different reports and speculation that I've seen in the Sunday papers.
I'm not asking you for commentary or about speculation. I'm just asking for clear answers to questions.
Yes, and I think the Prime Minister has been very clear, and we've got, for any questions that regarded as not yet answered, there are 3 reviews. The Prime Minister's set up some of them, is engaging fully with all of them, and I think the right thing to do is to respect the integrity of them, let them run their course, and they'll resolve any outstanding questions people have.
Oh, right. The Prime Minister's been very clear. I must have missed this, because I believe the key question is who initially paid for the refurbishment of the flat. So has he been clear in answering that?
I think, as I said, I can go back over what I said to you before, Sophie, but the PM's been very clear, covered the costs himself. He's followed all the codes of conduct. He's taken official advice. And frankly, I don't know any of the other details of it. And there are 3 reviews that will look into those questions. And the Prime Minister and the government, of course, embrace the transparency and the integrity of those processes.
OK, you're talking about the transparency and the integrity of the processes, the reviews that are going on. And one of them is being carried out by Christopher Guite, the new advisor on ministerial standards. So who has the power to decide whether the conclusions of that investigation are published and acted on?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's been clear that we will have full transparency in relation to the processes. And
it's not quite the question I asked, though, is it?
Well, so, look, that process is something that's been in place for successive governments. He's going to engage fully with it, and there'll be transparency around the conclusions of it.
What's the answer, then? If you're being clear and transparent, what's the answer to the question?
Sorry, I thought I'd answered it. What's the specific question you think I've overlooked, Sophie?
Who has the power to decide whether the conclusions of the investigation being carried out by Christopher Guite are published and acted on?
Well, in terms of the publication, the Prime Minister's already been clear that there's going to be full transparency. If you're asking who has the ultimate accountability over the Prime Minister, it's the electorate and the voters. That's the way it works in our democracy.
Thanks so much for explaining how the electoral system works in the UK. I really appreciate that. I'm just asking, who has the power to decide whether the conclusions of that investigation are acted on? The answer is the Prime Minister, isn't it?
Well, the Prime Minister is the ultimate arbiter of or the ultimate accountability for the ministerial code. He has the authority to dismiss ministers, to make sure they live up to the code. And so if your question is then, but who holds him to account, ultimately, and that's why I come back to the point I made earlier, there's no separate body or individual that will have power over him, is the British people. He's accountable to them. That's why we have elections. But
when it comes to this investigation, the Prime Minister is effectively judge, jury and executioner for his own trial?
No, because he's... As I've said, he's going to be fully transparent about it. He'll be accountable to Parliament, which is, of course, the main way the government of the day is held to account, and then ultimately the ballot box. That's the way it works.
OK. Let's just try and ask about another claim that's in the Sunday Times. I've got a feeling I know what the answer to this one's going to be as well. But the Sunday Times has also been told that the Prime Minister asked a Conservative Party donor to pay for his childcare costs. Is that true?
I've got no idea. You don't think I have conversations like that with the Prime Minister. I can't comment on every little bit of gossip that's in the newspapers, Sophie. I've had a pretty full schedule this week and next week with the G7. I've been out at the UN Cyprus talks. I've been talking to the UN Secretary General, so forgive me if I don't know all the ins and outs of the Prime Minister's private life, and I wouldn't comment on them even if I did. It's not the Prime Minister's private life, though, is it? It's not just gossip. The Electoral Commission is investigating whether the law has been broken. Exactly. So, and I think the right thing. So it's not gossip, is it? I think it. Well, the last thing you asked me about, I think, is an example of tittle tattle. But look, I'm not doubting that there are important issues at stake, which is why the Electoral Commission review should be allowed to run its course. And I don't think the right thing for me to do is say anything that could prejudice or is political commentary on that. Is £157,000 a year a decent salary? Yes, of course it is. And if you're referring to, what cabinet members or the Prime Minister, and of course we know when we go into public service, we do it as a matter of honour, and it's a great privilege to be able to do these roles, these jobs in government. And of course, Sophie, you'll know that we've been freezing ministerial salaries for many years now. We've taken that decision because of the financial climate that we're in, and we do these jobs because we're committed to public service. You're talking about the important issues that you've been involved in. Of course, we know that there are so many important issues going on at the minute with the pandemic and elsewhere. If that is the case, why is the Prime Minister spending his time phoning newspaper editors to criticise Dominic Cummings? No, again, you're asking me to comment or verify the speculation in the newspapers, but the Prime Minister is, I know, because I saw him last week, absolutely focused on the job of getting us through the pandemic and wants to get back to the levelling up agenda, making sure all parts of the UK are prospering and that we've got the investment we need. And we've got this exciting year of global leadership with the G7 presidency and the foreign ministers who I'll be welcoming to London next week. So we're looking at all of those issues, and that's where the Prime Minister is focusing his time, his efforts and his energy. See, this is genuinely what I don't understand about this, is that with all the things that you're listing there that the government needs to try and focus on, all of the things that are important issues for the electorate and the government as well, why don't you just shut this story down? Why do you have all these investigations? Why is the Cabinet Secretary spending his time trying to work out what happened? When you could just answer the questions.
Who paid for the original loan? I just don't understand why you're just not forthcoming with the answers.
I think the Prime Minister's been crystal clear about it. I can repeat the answers that I've given to you, but I do think if you've got those reviews underway, the right thing to do, you set them up in order to answer precisely the questions, Sophie, you're asking me. I think it's the right thing to do to let them run their course and not to try and prejudice them with political commentary. It's fine for journalists to do it and the papers, but I don't think it's right for a cabinet member to do that.
Do you really think the Prime Minister's been crystal clear?
Yeah, I do. And I think, do you know what, I've been out campaigning the local elections as well as all the stuff I'm doing as Foreign Secretary. Genuinely, no one has asked me about this.
OK, fine. Well, let's move on. You're hosting an in-person meeting of foreign ministers this week, and you're going to be talking about improving girls' education, you're going to be talking about reducing poverty, incredibly important things, of course, but you're also cutting the UK's aid spending by £4 billion. So are you just replacing hard cash with warm words here?
No, I don't think so. Look, you're right to say we've had to take this extremely difficult decision to reduce and find savings in the aid budget. That's because of the impact that COVID has had, the biggest contraction we've seen in the economy in 300 years, a budget deficit double what we saw at the peak of the financial crisis in 2008-9. But let's face it, let's be honest about it, be clear about it, we're still giving £10 billion of aid this year. We're the largest contributor to Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, with the third biggest G7 aid donor, measured as a proportion of GDP, on everything from climate finance, where we're doubling our contribution, to girls' education, where we're leading this charge to get 40 million more girls 12 years of quality education. We have an enormous impact. And as I said, we're still, notwithstanding the savings that I've been very honest and transparent about, we're still one of the leading aid spenders in the world. But one thing we're also doing, and that's why we're proud to host the G7 presidency, is we're using the example we set, the leadership we provide, and our convening power to get other countries to step up in what is a team effort, whether it's the challenge of shifting the dial on climate change, or girls' education, or indeed getting the very poorest countries access to the vaccine. And that's what Global Britain's all about, being a force for good in the world.
I understand, of course, the financial pressures that every government has to grapple with, but can you guarantee that these cuts to aid have been made to try and make sure that they minimise the harm on the poorest people?
So first of all, I don't think people do really realise, or certainly some of the commentary doesn't take full count of just how much damage the COVID has done to the public finances, and that's why I gave the figures I did earlier. But the way we've approached this, first of all, as I said, we've got £10 billion, huge amount, still the third biggest G7 donor. And what I did at the start of the process is set 7 priorities from climate finance and climate change through to humanitarian support and relief, and made sure, rather than salami slicing budgets according to, I don't know, 10, 15, whatever percent, we actually said, no, we're going to really focus on driving and getting the very most out of the £10 billion that taxpayers and the public funding is going into. And the reason we wanted to do that is to have a more strategic approach, and also to get maximum value out of every penny of taxpayers' money that goes abroad. And that's the approach we've taken.
You're talking about maximum value out of taxpayers' money. The UN Population Fund, which supports family planning, says the UK is cutting 85% of its support this year. UNICEF says it's seeing a 60% drop in core funding. And they say the cuts are falling on the shoulders of the world's children. Are you comfortable with that?
Look, I found the process of making those savings very difficult, but of course you'd expect that. What I'd say in relation to public health is we're still putting in £1.3 billion into global public health initiatives next year. Over 5 years, we're putting £1.6 billion into Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance. Obviously, our public health spending has been shifted and focused on the pandemic, and on everything from the billion doses that we've secured for the poorest countries around the world, to the fact that we invested in the R&D that produced the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is now helping so many countries come through the pandemic. I think we've had an incredible impact. And I can tell you, when I speak to Dr. Tedros at the World Health Organization, or the UN Secretary General, I spoke to both of them in person this week, they've got nothing but praise for the huge impact and the leadership that we're taking. The G7 this week, the Foreign Ministers meeting, is a great opportunity, not just to lead by example, but to use our convening power and make it a real team effort to tackle these problems together.
OK, Dominic Raab, thank you very
Nice
much for coming on the programme this morning. Thank you.